Hello and welcome to the News at 7 live here on FeckTV.com with myself, Noel Byrne, and joining me this evening is the very talented Chris Bennett. We've got all the very latest on today's top stories from Ireland and abroad, and we're kicking off with one in Dublin today at the Central Criminal Court, rather an interesting court case. A 72-year-old man who pleaded guilty to 16 charges of rape and sexual assault has been released on bail. Patrick O'Brien from Bray in County Wicklow was accused of rape and sexual assault of his daughter Fiona between the years 1973 and 1982. And the court heard that it was as frequent as having dinner. And Fiona also said that it happened at least once a week.
Judge Paul Carney has sentenced Mr. O'Brien to 12 years, though 9 of those have been suspended due to the accused's ill health, remorse and time spent since the incidents. Judge Carney did, however, say that it was one of the worst cases of abuse of a daughter that you can possibly find.
It's interesting, first of all, that he said that and still let the man out.
Yeah, it's a very lenient sentence.
It really
on the
is.
face of it.
Speaking to the media after the sentencing, the daughter Fiona, she said she was absolutely devastated with the result and said that her father had never said sorry to her for what she had done, or what he had done. She also added that it had caused the failure of her first marriage and also resulted in her trying to commit suicide on 2 occasions.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is an incident which has essentially destroyed the life of a young person, now obviously not so young, and Mr. O'Brien has now served no jail time whatsoever for these crimes.
No.
What kind of a message is this actually sending out?
I was literally just about to say, because Fiona also added afterwards when she was talking to the press that she's not sure what type of message this sends out to either Ireland or indeed the broader world, because to basically let this a man away, pending an appeal, the judge said that it's an appeal-worthy case for either side to take. It's still letting a man, regardless of how ill he is, he's still let him out into the general public. Now, you'd presume the judge thinks that he isn't, liable to do it again. But I think for his daughter Fiona to feel a little bit of justice.
Well, to have some form of closure, I suppose. I mean, really, the whole issue around ill health, remorse and that type of thing, it's almost a compassionate leave. The compassion doesn't seem to have been shown in this case, with the no apology, with the constant, thing with the daughter.
It was interesting because the judge said, he felt like the man was remorseful, but yet the daughter said, he hadn't said sorry at all. So it's kind of, it's certainly an interesting ruling by the judge.
Yeah, very lenient for me, frankly.
I'd imagine we'll be keeping track of how the case develops in terms of where the appeal will go.
Absolutely. President Obama has taken his second oath of office in Washington, D.C. today in front of hundreds of thousands of people watching. He used his speech at the event to call for a divided nation to come together to right the nation's course. He was quoted as saying, "Now more than ever, we should do this as one nation." This comes after the bitterness surrounding the elections themselves and the deep divides that have riven US politics in recent months.
As expected, Obama didn't discuss policy, but it is thought that he will discuss his policy over the next 4 years in next month's State of the Union address. I suppose looking back at the last 4 years, Chris, it's kind of been a mixed bag. A lot of people, I'd imagine, would say that he didn't do as much as they thought, because if you recall, the 2008 election was, it seemed like he was the saviour of all things American at the time. Yeah,
it was sort of riding this crest of a wave of hope, to sort of, I suppose, paraphrase his entire campaign. And I think a lot of people felt, and as was shown, I suppose, in some of the comments made around the recent election time, that he didn't quite make good on all of the promises he alluded to in the 2008 elections.
No, he certainly didn't, but I wonder, was it a case of, he was always thinking that he was going to have to run for re-election? Was he worried that if he did anything too drastic, it would offend, various sides? So he held back a little.
I'm always sort of wary of that kind of thing, though. I know if we look at it from a realpolitik point of view, he was playing the right game. But I sort of disagree with politicians who go in there and their first thought is to re-election, rather than their first thought being, these are the things that need to be sorted, I'm going to push them through regardless of if I get re-elected or not.
I suppose to look at some of his highlights, if you want to call them that, from the last 4 years, you've got the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the army. A lot of people welcomed that move, some not so much, as we saw. The capturing and killing of Osama bin Laden as well. That was a big day for America and indeed the wider world. The army as well in the US, they pulled out of Iraq, and of course he got the ball rolling on Obamacare.
Yeah, I mean, he's done a lot. I mean, don't get us wrong. And a lot of the things that he did want to push through, certainly with the healthcare policies, were blocked quite considerably by the Republicans, who've been increasingly obstinate over the last 4 years. Hopefully we might see some of that tailing away in the next 4 going forward. But now Obama has to face the prospect of pushing through Congress such propositions as gun violence laws, immigration, and the big one, which is the federal budget deficit. Now, the US has pushed itself repeatedly close to the fiscal cliff, and sort of last-minute appeals in Congress have saved it so far. This is something that has to be key to the next, really the next year for Mr. Obama.
Yeah, well, they have a big vote in the next couple of months in terms of raising the debt ceiling once again. It's well into the trillions at this stage. You know, it's unsustainable for America to have such debt. I suppose in terms of the opposition, they always branded Obama as a one-term president. Obviously, you know, that isn't the case now. You'd wonder, will they ease back a little because they know he's going to be gone in 4 years? But at the same time, I suppose they'd hope to get, you know, their own candidate in the next time around.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a rocky 4 years. I think it's going to be tough, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we might actually see a little glimmer of the hope that he had in 2008.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things that we could look to in the short term is how he deals with the shootings and gun control. Do you know how far that's going to go?
That'll be a bellwether.
Exactly, because there's going to be a huge amount of opposition to that in Congress, so we'll have to watch that space. Coming closer to home, though, and Enda Kenny has apparently been left rattled after the protest at the weekend in Dublin, the Vigil for Life protest, which of course was the anti-abortion one organised, with an estimated 25,000 people in attendance. Independent Senator Ronan Mullen made the remarks today. He said that Kenny was rattled by the amount of people who turned out on a cold January evening. Of course, at the protest, there was a variant of speakers, including people from the middle ground who, I suppose, you know, they kind of look at it almost independently. I think that's left Enda Kenny shook. GA legend Mickey Hart said this is the targeting of innocent unborn children. And it's remarks like that, as we understand, that Enda Kenny has been left worried. It'll be interesting to see if there's going to be a knock-on effect as to the government's direction with legislation.
It's interesting that on Radio 1 this morning, the Minister for European Affairs, Lucinda Creighton, has denied that she's at odds with Kenny over the legislation, yet then came out and said that she was against the inclusion of suicide as grounds for abortion, as it would open the floodgates. Slightly at cross purposes there, it seems.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, it's almost a typical political statement to say you're not at odds and then directly follow it up by saying, you know, something that indicates you clearly are at odds. It's, you know, it's a well-known fact that there are a lot of Fine Gael TDs, both backbenchers and more prominent ministers in cabinet, that are against, you know, this legislation being brought in the sense that it'll include suicide. In that same interview, she refused to be drawn on whether or not she would vote against the legislation if it comes forward such that it includes, you know, suicide as a grounds for abortion.
It's certainly a sort of an emotionally charged debate, and one that has really gripped, you know, the country since the case of, you know, Halapadova case came in. The legislation itself is not, I suppose, overly controversial.
No, it's still one of the most restricted in Europe, if, you know, not the Western world. So it's a tricky one. I can see both sides of the argument, but, you know, it's also, I think, there's a certain amount of danger for politicians to be coming out of this stage, you know, with statements like this, because that will have an influence on the general public as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose now really is the time for you know, for politicians to almost, because you know the legislation is coming up fast, is really to nail their colours to the mast on this one and stand by it.
Exactly. I mean, Fine Gael and Labour are, you know, obviously in government. Labour has a much more open approach to this. They're for abortion and probably much wider than what we're going to get. But Fine Gael, you know, it seems to be at war with itself. Enda Kenny and his party did make a promise before the last election that they would not introduce legislation for abortion. But here they are. They found themselves having to do so.
I think that's the sort of nature of politics, though, when something as large as the Halappanavar case comes in, that the nature of politics is that sometimes it does have to change. And I suppose, almost respect Enda Kenny for coming out and saying, well, maybe we do have to compromise on something like this.
Do you know, Chris, could I just ask you, in terms of, you know, being from the UK and looking at this from that angle, are statements like this, you know, including suicide will open the floodgates, do you find those kind of statements, you know, kind of strange to make?
I almost find them quite offensive, frankly, because I suppose looking at it, saying that it will open the floodgates is essentially saying that women are going to use the excuse of suicide to go and have abortions. And I think that greatly sort of attacks those people who do have real mental issues that may lead to suicide. It sort of denigrates them by saying that it's not, you know, a right thing, that if they are in that situation, that state of mind, that they can't obviously be, I suppose, their lives be saved in that case. For me, the whole situation, the law is mad, I suppose.
It really is. I suppose that's another aspect to this whole abortion debate. You know, it's highlighted the fact that Ireland has quite a strange view of mental health, that we aren't there yet in terms of, we don't think physical health and mental health equate at all. So hopefully off the back of this, you know, that will be addressed, and hopefully people will begin to realise they should be equated.
I suppose the final thought on it really is that it's a religious aspect, it's a religious issue essentially, which is fueling the anti-abortion side of things. Yet we need to come in and say, well, where is the separation going to be in Ireland between church and state and legislation? You know, do you want to go down the theocracy route of saying that essentially this is something that is religiously believed in and therefore we should legislate for it, or completely step back and go, we are secular, this is how we're going to operate?
Certainly a pivotal point in Ireland's history, but moving on, and an update on the Algerian hostage crisis.
Absolutely. The Algerian Prime Minister, Abdelmalek Saleh, has gone on the news record today to say that 37 foreign hostages were killed in the sort of storming of the gas plant in Algeria. He has mentioned that several of them were actually executed. One Algerian worker has died. Also, he has gone on record saying that 29 militants were killed, including the leader of the hostage takers, Mohamed El Amin Ben Sheneb, and 3 of the militants were captured.
Interestingly, one of the militants is actually believed to be Canadian, which surprised a lot of people interested in this story. The Japanese officials have confirmed that 7 of their citizens were killed in the attack, 3 US citizens and 3 UK citizens as well. Other nationals from Norway, Romania, Malaysia and Philippines, it's not known about their status, as the countries have yet to comment on them.
2 UK citizens who were killed have been named also today as Paul Morgan and Gary Barlow, both from Liverpool. Mr. Morgan has been described as a true gentleman, and Mr. Barlow was a father of 2 who loved life. Now, Prime Minister Saleh has praised his special forces as well today, essentially saying that the aim of the terrorists was to blow up the gas plant. There have been talks of the brutality that went on throughout the siege, including one Filipino hostage saying that the terrorists used foreign nationals as human shields. So the argument here, I suppose, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not it was right for the Algerian military to go in so hard and so fast, and obviously the large loss of life that has resulted from the operation. But it does seem to go back that have a risk of the whole plant being potentially blown up and the hostility and brutality that was coming out from the terrorists. I suspect Mr. Saleh is saying that they really had no choice.
Yeah, pretty much. But unfortunately, Chris, it seems like, you know, this won't be the last such case, because Mokhtar Belmokhtar and his brigade, the Mulfamin Brigade, they have said there will be further attacks like this unless the war in Mali ends. So, you know, it could be a case of, in the next month, we could experience such cases again. One
would hope so, but it's certainly something that we will be watching avidly.
Yeah.
We've got a final story tonight, slightly lighter in tone, shall we say, to go back to my favourite Italian politician, Silvio Berlusconi, of course. He's now suing the gossip magazine Oggi for printing photos of him embracing, I say embracing, 5 young women at his villa in Sardinia.
Now, to me, Berlusconi seems to have double standards on this issue, because wasn't it one of his own magazines that printed the topless pictures of Kate Middleton before Christmas?
Yes, it was. He seems to have ignored that in his quest for £85,000 in compensation. He says he's been unfairly described as having a harem around him. To me, that sounds like something he'd probably quite like.
Oh, without a doubt, but I wouldn't expect any less at this stage from Berlusconi, you know. But it'll be interesting to see if the public, you know, if they'll take much care, you know, notice of this, in the sense that will his party be able to get re-elected?
Well, strangely, polls have shown that the support has been rising steadily for Mr. Berlusconi after a series of television debates where he met his fiercest critics, actually pretty much for the first time, because in his previous campaigns he's gone on his own television networks. Now he's going on the opposition ones. Okay. He's actually attacked the critics using, you know, jokes and gags and props and sort of things like that in his own inimitable style. He's come off extremely well, and over the last couple of days his party have actually raised 2 points in the opinion polls. There is a month to go before the Italian elections on the 24th, 25th of February. But as it stands now, we could certainly see at least his party getting back in, if not a role for Mr. Berlusconi.
Yeah, fingers crossed, I'd say you're hoping, is it?
I absolutely. Again, I state not Italian, so good for me.
He certainly adds a bit of excitement to the humdrum of, you know, politics anyway.
He does.
That's it for tonight. Don't forget, at 10 p.m. here on FeckTV.com, we're going to be looking at the dark underbelly of the internet, and it's definitely not one to miss. We'll talk to you then.